They mocked the small human until he carried the deadliest mission alone. Before their ship lands like this, if you believe humans always rise. Enjoy the story. The Oblivion's edge stretched across the void like a metallic cathedral, its hull gleaming with the combined technologies of 9 alien civilizations. Spanning nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, the vessel represented the greatest collaborative achievement in galactic history, a testament to what could be accomplished when species chose cooperation over conquest. Within its corridors, beings of impossible diversity moved with purpose, each contributing their unique capabilities to humanity's first journey beyond the rim of known space. Crystal and Zaylan moved through the hallways like living music, their bodies resonating in harmonious frequencies that served as both communication and navigation. Their translucent forms caught and refracted light in patterns that told stories spanning millennia, each flicker a word in a language older than Earth's sun. Towering Keth warriors clicked through the passages on exoskeletons that had evolved for combat on their high-gravity homeworld, their multiple arms capable of wielding 6 weapons simultaneously, while their compound eyes tracked threats from every angle. Graceful Hydralis navigated with tentacles that danced through the air like underwater ballet, their movements so fluid, they seemed to swim through space itself. The Thrakari silicon-based beings from the molten world of Forge Prime moved in environmental suits that barely contained their radiant heat signatures. Their presence warmed entire sections of the ship, and crew members from ice worlds often sought their company during rest periods. Gaseous ethereals existed in specialized atmospheric containers, their consciousnesses flickering between states of matter like living aurora. The Greylex warriors, silver-scaled and predatory, commanded respect through 6 centuries of honorable combat across 3 galactic conflicts. And then there was Ethan Cole. At 5'6", the human biologist looked like a child lost in a giant's world, dwarfed by beings who had evolved under alien suns to meet challenges that would shatter most Earth life within moments. His worn leather satchel, a gift from his grandfather, who had explored Earth's most dangerous wilderness regions, contained equipment that represented the pinnacle of human scientific achievement. Yet, compared to the advanced technology that hummed throughout the vessel, his tools seemed almost primitive, a reminder that humanity was still learning to walk among civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel when humans were discovering fire. The other species had evolved on worlds that demanded specific adaptations. The Greylex homeworld featured gravity 3 times that of Earth, and predators that made terrestrial apex hunters look like insects. The Keith came from a planet where survival required armored bodies and lightning reflexes. The Hydralis had developed in deep ocean trenches, where intelligence meant the difference between evolution and extinction. Ethan had evolved on a world that demanded adaptation itself, the ability to change, to learn to overcome obstacles through ingenuity rather than natural weapons. Where other species had developed claws, humanity had developed tools. Where others had evolved armor, humans had learned to create shelter. Where others had gained strength, humans had gained the ability to work together to pass knowledge between generations to persist through challenges that would break more physically powerful beings. This adaptability, this stubborn refusal to accept defeat, had carried humanity from the caves of Earth to the stars themselves. But aboard Oblivion's edge, surrounded by beings whose very existence challenged every assumption about life in the universe, Ethan wondered if those qualities would be enough. He stepped through the main corridor, his boots echoing softly against the polished biofloor that responded to each footstep with subtle bioluminescent patterns. The corridor itself was a marvel of engineering walls that shifted color to indicate direction and function ceiling panels that adjusted light spectrum to match the circadian rhythms of different species, and air recyclers that monitored and adjusted atmospheric composition in real time to accommodate the breathing requirements of dozens of alien physiologies. A group of Greylex warriors passed their silver scales catching the artificial light like living armor. Each stood nearly 9 feet tall, their movements flowing with predatory grace that spoke of evolution on a world where anything less than perfection meant death. One warrior, scarred and bearing the marks of veteran status, glanced down at Ethan with golden eyes that seemed to weigh and measure everything they saw. The assessment lasted perhaps 3 seconds before the warrior looked away, with what might have been dismissal or perhaps something more complex. The human pressed forward following the digital displays that flickered in languages he was still learning to read. Galactic's script flowed like liquid metal across the screens, while Hydralis symbols pulsed in rhythm with their creator's thought patterns. Xalan communications resonated through the ship's structure itself, messages transmitted through harmonic frequencies that required specialized equipment for other species to decode. Every step took him deeper into a world where he was demonstrably the smallest, weakest, and most fragile being aboard. The other species had evolved natural advantages that made them uniquely suited for interstellar exploration. The Galactics could survive in atmospheric compositions that would kill humans instantly. The Keth possessed natural radiation resistance that allowed them to work in environments that would cook human DNA within hours. The Hydralis could enter hibernation states that reduced their resource requirements to nearly zero during long voyages. The air recyclers hummed with alien efficiency, processing atmospheric combinations that would poison most Earth life within minutes. Oxygen percentages, nitrogen levels, trace gases, humidity, all constantly adjusted by systems that made Earth's most advanced environmental controls look like primitive bellows. Ethan's personal life support unit, barely larger than a briefcase and containing 3 backup systems plus emergency supplies, seemed pathetic in comparison to beings who carried their survival requirements in their own biology. A young Greylex warrior, his scales still bright with youth and unmarked by the scars that decorated veteran fighters, blocked Ethan's path with deliberate intention. Drakthar stood 8 feet tall and possessed the kind of natural physical dominance that made him a legend among his peer group. His silver scales rippled with underlying muscle, and his golden eyes held the confidence of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't overcome through raw power. Among the Galactics, he was considered a prodigy, the youngest warrior ever to earn combat certification, the fastest to master their traditional martial disciplines. But like many prodigies, Drakthar had developed an unfortunate tendency to confuse natural talent with universal superiority. "You're the Earth representative," Drakthar said, his voice carrying the rumble of barely contained power. The sound resonated through his chest cavity and emerged as something that was more force of nature than mere communication. "Smaller than I expected. Much smaller." The comment was clearly intended to gather an audience, and it succeeded. Several other young Galactic warriors had already begun to converge on their location, eager to witness whatever entertainment their informal leader had planned. A few Keth engineers paused in their duties to observe, their compound eyes reflecting curiosity. Even a passing ethereal slowed their drift through the corridor, their gaseous form shimmering with interest. "Ethan Cole," the human replied, extending his hand in the universal gesture of greeting that had been established through painstaking diplomatic protocols between Earth and the Galactic Cooperative. The handshake, a simple human custom, had been adopted as a standard form of non-threatening contact between species. Drakthar stared at the offered hand for a long moment, his golden eyes shifting between Ethan's face and the extended appendage as if trying to decode some hidden meaning. The silence stretched for several heartbeats, while the gathered audience watched with growing interest. Finally, with a gesture that somehow managed to convey both amusement and dismissal, Drakthar turned away without responding, leaving Ethan's hand extended in empty air. The snub was carefully calculated and perfectly executed. In Galactic culture, refusing a greeting gesture was equivalent to declaring someone beneath notice not worth acknowledging as a sentient being. It was the kind of insult that, delivered between Galactic warriors, would typically result in immediate physical combat to restore honor. "This ship houses the greatest warriors and minds from 9 civilizations." Drakthar continued addressing the small gathering that had formed to observe the exchange. His voice carried clearly through the corridor, ensuring that his words would be heard by as many beings as possible. "We face dangers that would shatter worlds, challenges that test the limits of courage and capability. We explore regions of space where the very laws of physics become unreliable. And Earth sends this." The word "this" was delivered with the kind of dismissive tone usually reserved for malfunctioning equipment or contaminated food supplies. Around him, several younger warriors laughed, not the genuine amusement of humor, but the cruel laughter of predators who had identified easy prey. The days aboard Oblivion's Edge fell into a rhythm of isolation, for Ethan, a pattern as predictable as the ship's artificial day-night cycle and twice as lonely. While other species formed natural clusters throughout the vessel, warriors training together in combat chambers that simulated the gravities and atmospheres of their homeworlds. Scientists sharing discoveries in laboratories equipped with instruments that could analyze matter at the subatomic level. Engineers collaborating on ship improvements using tools that resembled magic more than technology. The human remained an island unto himself. The social dynamics aboard the ship were complex and carefully orchestrated. Each species maintained their own quarters designed to replicate the environmental conditions of their homeworlds. The Greylacs lived in sections with increased gravity and higher atmospheric pressure. The Hydralis occupied chambers filled with specialized gases and elevated humidity. The crystalline Xalien existed in areas with precise harmonic resonance that allowed them to maintain their structural integrity over vast distances from their homeworld. But beyond environmental needs, the species naturally gravitated toward their own kind for cultural and psychological comfort. They shared common references, similar thought patterns, comparable physical capabilities. A Greylax warrior could spar with another Greylax using techniques developed over millennia of their martial traditions. A Xalan scientist could communicate with their colleagues through harmonic frequencies that conveyed complex mathematical concepts in seconds. Ethan had no such community aboard Oblivion's Edge. He was literally the only representative of his species, carrying the weight of humanity's first impression on the galactic stage. Every action he took, every word he spoke, every decision he made would be judged not just as individual behavior, but as representative of his entire civilization. The pressure was enormous and constant. He spent his time in Laboratory 7, a compact space that had been specifically modified to accommodate human needs. The laboratory's atmospheric controls maintained Earth-normal air composition, while specialized lighting systems provided the specific wavelengths of radiation that human biology required for optimal function. The workspace was filled with equipment designed for biological analysis microscopes that could resolve individual molecules, chemical synthesizers capable of creating compounds with atomic precision, and computers that could model biological interactions with stunning accuracy. Ethan had requested the smallest available laboratory space, knowing that his presence was already seen as an imposition by some crew members. He understood that every resource allocated to human needs was a resource not available for more useful purposes. Laboratory 7 had originally been designated as storage space, but the ship's quartermaster had reluctantly converted it when Earth's diplomatic corps insisted that their representative required appropriate facilities. Here, surrounded by specimens from dozens of worlds, he could lose himself in work that mattered. The specimens told stories of evolution that spanned millions of years of life, adapting to conditions that would have destroyed Earth's biosphere instantly. Each sample represented a puzzle to be solved, a mystery that might unlock secrets of survival in environments that human technology could barely simulate. "Still playing with flowers, pet human?" Drakthar's voice carried through the lab's open doorway. The young warrior had made it his personal mission to remind Ethan of his place aboard the ship. While real beings prepare for combat, you examine. "What is that grass?" Ethan didn't look up from his microscope. "Venomous spine moss from Kepler for 442. The spores contain a neurotoxin that affects the central nervous system. I'm mapping its molecular structure to understand how it Toxins? Drakthar interrupted with a laugh. Of course the human studies poisons. Cannot fight with honor, so you dream of striking from shadows. The comment stung because it held a grain of painful truth. Humans had survived on Earth not through strength or natural weapons, but through cunning tool use and understanding their environment. What Drakthar saw as cowardice, Ethan knew as survival skills that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. The moss isn't weaponizable, Ethan said quietly, but understanding it could save lives if anyone accidentally. Save lives, Drakthar scoffed. You cannot even save your own life if this ship faced real danger. Why should we trust you to save ours? The warrior departed, leaving Ethan alone with his specimens and the crushing weight of being perpetually dismissed. Through the lab's viewing port, he could see the vast emptiness of space stars scattered like distant promises of worlds where he might belong. Unknown to Ethan, another presence observed from the corridor. General Vornar, eldest of the Greylax warriors, had served in 3 galactic conflicts and commanded respect through 6 centuries of honorable combat. His scales had darkened to deep silver with age, and scars crisscrossed his massive frame like a living map of battles fought and won. Vornar never spoke during these observations. He simply watched as the small human continued his work undaunted by mockery, driven by a dedication that reminded the old warrior of something he had thought extinct true purpose beyond personal glory. The dining hall aboard Oblivion's Edge resembled a vast amphitheater where dozens of species gathered to consume their preferred sustenance, each group clustered around specialized feeding stations designed to accommodate their unique nutritional requirements. The space itself was a marvel of adaptive architecture surfaces that could shift from tables to feeding pools, atmospheric composition that varied by zone to accommodate different respiratory needs, and lighting that adjusted spectrum and intensity to match the preferences of various visual systems. Crystalline beings absorbed energy directly from nutrient pools that hummed with electrical current, their bodies lighting up like living stained glass as they processed raw energy into usable nutrition. Carnivorous warriors devoured what appeared to be still-moving protein sources, their feeding rituals often accompanied by low growls of satisfaction that would have terrified most Earth predators. The Thrakari consumed superheated mineral compounds that glowed like molten metal, their silicon-based biology requiring temperatures that would vaporize organic matter instantly. Gaseous ethereals fed by absorbing specific atmospheric compounds through their permeable boundaries, their forms brightening as they processed nutrients. Ethan sat alone at a corner table specifically designed for humanoid physiology, methodically consuming his human rations, carefully balanced nutrition packages designed to sustain Earth biology in alien environments where every molecule of local organic matter could potentially be toxic. The food was functional rather than flavorful, optimized for nutritional density and long-term storage rather than taste. But it kept him alive in a place where most organic matter would poison him within hours. The Galactic community had learned through bitter experience that biological compatibility between species was rare to the point of being practically non-existent. What served as nutrition for one species could be lethal toxin for another. "Look what crawls from its hole," Drakthar announced, his voice carrying across the dining hall with the kind of calculated volume designed to attract maximum attention. Several younger warriors gathered around him like courtiers surrounding a king eager for entertainment and desperate to remain in the good graces of their unofficial leader. The pet human feeds on paste while warriors consume real food. The term pet human had become Drakthar's preferred method of referring to Ethan, and it had begun to spread among other young crew members. The designation carried multiple layers of insult. It suggested that humans were domesticated creatures, rather than sapient beings, implied that Ethan's presence was tolerated rather than valued, and positioned him as something amusing rather than useful. The Gralix warrior reached for a collection of plant samples, arranged on a nearby serving station specimens that had been brought aboard from their recent planetary survey of Kepler 442c. The samples were intended for scientific analysis rather than consumption, but the distinction apparently meant little to Drakthar. The collection included various flowering plants, root vegetables, and fruiting bodies that represented the diverse flora of an alien ecosystem. Among them, Ethan spotted something that made his blood freeze in his veins: delicate blue flowers with distinctive crystalline structures along their petals' formations that he immediately recognized from his analysis work. The flowers were sear blight blossoms, beautiful specimens that concealed one of the most potent neurotoxins he had ever encountered in his xenobiological studies. "Drakthar, don't..." Ethan began, rising from his seat. "Don't what?" the warrior demanded. "Don't eat food that would nourish a true being. Don't prove that humans are weak because they cannot process real nutrition." "Those flowers are sear blight blossoms," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet dining hall. "The crystals contain a concentrated neurotoxin. Even one flower could..." "Could what?" Drakthar lifted the blue blossom, its crystalline petals catching the light like captured starfire. "Kill a mighty Greylax warrior, we who have stomachs of iron and blood of fire." The dining hall fell silent. Every being present understood the challenge implicit in the moment. To acknowledge the human's warning would be to admit that their mighty warrior feared the advice of the weakest creature aboard the ship. "The neurotoxin acts on sodium channels," Ethan continued desperately. "It doesn't matter how strong you are. Biology is biology. Please, I'm trying to help. Help. Drakthar's laughter boomed through the hall. The human wants to help. The same species that needs machines to breathe, machines to stay warm, machines to process food. What could such weakness possibly teach strength? Without hesitation, Drakthar bit down on the flower. The crystalline petals crunched between his teeth, and he swallowed with exaggerated satisfaction. There, he announced. The human's poison flower, delicious. 3 other young warriors followed suit, each consuming flowers while their companions cheered. Ethan watched in horror, counting the minutes in his head. The toxin would need time to enter their bloodstreams, cross into their nervous systems, begin its terrible work. 15 minutes, he whispered, gathering his equipment. Maybe 20 if their metabolism is slower than I calculated. Ethan ran through the corridors of Oblivion's Edge, his emergency medical kit bouncing against his hip. He had exactly 17 minutes based on xenobiological absorption rates, and estimated body mass before the searblight toxin reached lethal concentrations in the warriors' bloodstreams. The ship's medical bay hummed with future tech designed to treat dozens of alien physiologies simultaneously. Dr. Theiss, the ship's chief medical officer, looked up from her research station as Ethan burst through the doors. Human Ethan! The Zaylan scientist chimed, her crystalline body resonating with curiosity. Your metabolic readings suggest extreme stress. Are you experiencing biological distress? Not me? Ethan gasped, dumping his equipment onto a workstation. 4 Greylax warriors just consumed searblight blossoms. I need to synthesize a broad-spectrum neural inhibitor before the toxin reaches critical concentration. Doctor. Theiss's melodic hum shifted to a discordant frequency, the Zaylan equivalent of alarm. Searblight toxin. That is problematic. My medical databases contain no specific antidote for that compound. Because no one's ever been foolish enough to eat it before. Ethan muttered, his hands flying over chemical synthesis equipment. I'm working from theoretical models based on the toxin's molecular structure. If I can create something to block sodium channel interaction. The laboratory door chimed and General Vornar entered. The massive warrior moved with surprising quiet, his golden eyes fixed on Ethan's frantic work. The young ones are showing symptoms, Vornar said simply. Ethan's hands never stopped moving. What kind of symptoms? Trembling, difficulty standing. Drakthar collapsed outside the dining hall. The human's jaw tightened. Neural pathway disruption. It's starting. He held up a vial of pale blue liquid. This should work in theory. Should. But I've never tested it on Greylax physiology. And if you are wrong, Ethan met the ancient warrior's gaze. If I'm wrong, they die anyway. If I'm right and do nothing, they definitely die. Without waiting for permission, Ethan ran from the medical bay toward the dining hall. He found chaos, 4 warriors writhing on the floor, while their companions stood helplessly by. Drakthar's silver scales had turned a sickly gray, and green foam leaked from his mouth. Get away from them, someone shouted as Ethan approached. The human did this. He poisoned them somehow. I tried to warn them, Ethan said, kneeling beside Drakthar. The warrior's eyes rolled back, showing only whites, and his massive frame convulsed with seizures. This will either save him or kill him faster, another warrior snarled. Why should we trust the creature who caused this? Ethan prepared the injection, his hands steady, despite the accusations surrounding him. Because, he said quietly, sometimes trust isn't about logic. Sometimes it's about doing what's right even when everyone thinks you're wrong. The needle pierced Drakthar's scaled hide, delivering the experimental antidote directly into his bloodstream. Ethan moved to the next warrior, then the next, working with methodical precision, while voices around him demanded his arrest, his removal, his execution. The medical bay became Ethan's world for the next 6 hours. He monitored vital signs, adjusted dosages, and watched 4 of the ship's most arrogant young warriors fight for their lives. Dr. Theiss worked beside him, her crystalline form pulsing with concentrated effort as she maintained life support systems for failing Greylax physiologies. General Vornar had not left the medical bay since the crisis began. The ancient warrior stood like a statue, watching everything with those penetrating golden eyes. Other crew members came and went, some offering assistance, others demanding answers, most simply observing the unprecedented sight of a human, fighting to save beings who had shown him nothing but contempt. "Their neural activity is stabilizing," Dr. Thiz announced, her harmonic voice carrying notes of cautious optimism. "The antidote appears to be counteracting the toxin's effects." Ethan slumped against a wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "How long before we know for certain?" "Another hour, perhaps 2, but the indicators are positive." A commotion at the medical bay entrance drew their attention. Captain Nalia entered, her tentacles moving in complex patterns that Ethan had learned indicated deep concern. The Hydralisk commander's large eyes surveyed the scene: 4 unconscious warriors, 1 exhausted human, and enough monitoring equipment to supply a small hospital. "Report," Captain Nalia commanded. Dr. Thiz provided a clinical summary while Ethan remained silent. He had learned that humans were expected to speak only when directly addressed, and then only to answer specific questions. "So," Captain Nalia said, finally her tentacles settling into a more relaxed configuration, "human Ethan prevented these warriors from dying due to their own foolishness." "I tried to warn them," Ethan said quietly. "They didn't listen." "Yet you saved them anyway." "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan looked at the unconscious warriors, at the beings whose survival skills would far exceed his own in any direct confrontation, whose strength could tear him apart without effort, whose entire existence aboard this ship served to remind him of human inadequacy. "Because they're crew members," he said simply. "Because this is what we do. We help each other." General Vornar stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the medical bay. "Human Ethan," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that Ethan had never heard before. "I would speak with you. Privately." They walked to an observation deck where stars wheeled slowly past the ship's ports. Vornar stood silently for several minutes, and Ethan had learned not to interrupt the contemplations of the ancient warrior. "I have served in 3 galactic conflicts," Vornar finally said. "I have commanded armies, destroyed fleets, brought entire civilizations to their knees. I have been called the greatest warrior of my generation." He turned to face Ethan directly. "But I have never done what you did today. I just synthesized an antidote." "No." Vornar's voice cut through the human's protest. "You saved beings who despise you. You risked your life for creatures who would not do the same for you. You showed mercy to those who have shown you none." The ancient warrior was quiet again, golden eyes reflecting starlight. "My people have forgotten what that means. We remember how to fight, how to conquer, how to take what we want through force. But we have forgotten how to protect the weak, how to sacrifice for others, how to be truly strong." "Strength isn't about size or fighting ability," Ethan said. "It's about doing what needs to be done even when it's difficult, even when no one understands." "Yes," Vornar agreed. "And that is why you are more dangerous than any warrior aboard this ship." The emergency klaxon shattered the peaceful rhythm of ship operations, its urgent wail echoing through every corridor of Oblivion's edge. Ethan dropped his analysis of Kepler 4842 plant samples and joined the streams of crew members rushing toward the main assembly hall. Captain Nalia stood before the massive display screen, her tentacles moving in the rapid patterns that indicated crisis-level stress. Behind her, an image showed a research station orbiting a frozen world, its hull dark, except for emergency power indicators flashing red against the cosmic night. 14 hours ago, we lost contact with Research Station Omega-7, Captain Nalia announced. The station is crewed by 6 scientists from various member species, studying crystalline formations in the Frost 7 system. Their last transmission indicated catastrophic power failure during an unexpected stellar storm. The display shifted to show Frost 7 itself a world locked in perpetual winter, where temperatures dropped to minus 180 degrees Celsius, and electromagnetic storms raged continuously across the surface. Emergency protocols require a rescue mission, the captain continued. However, the current stellar storm activity makes standard approach impossible. All navigation systems fail in the electromagnetic interference. Landing would require manual piloting and primitive survival skills. Commander Brix, the ship's chief tactical officer, stood from his position among the senior staff. The Keth warrior's exoskeleton gleamed under the assembly hall lights as he spoke. Captain, with respect, this mission is suicide. No being can survive those conditions long enough to reach the station and return. We should wait for the storms to pass. The station's emergency power will fail within 18 hours, Captain Nalia replied. The research team will be dead long before we could reach them. A murmur ran through the assembled crew. Ethan understood the mathematics of the situation. It was a simple equation of risk versus reward, and every rational analysis suggested that 7 lives were not worth risking additional deaths in an impossible rescue mission. "I'll go," Ethan said. The assembly hall fell silent. Several hundred beings turned to stare at the small human who had just volunteered for what everyone agreed was a suicide mission. "Human Ethan," Captain Nalia said carefully, "the conditions on Frost 7 would kill you within minutes. Your species lacks the natural adaptations necessary for survival in extreme cold environments." "Maybe," Ethan agreed, "but I have something else." He stepped forward, moving to the front of the assembly where everyone could see him clearly. "I have survival skills that don't depend on future tech. I know how to navigate by magnetic compass when electronic systems fail. I know how to build shelter, maintain body heat, and find direction in a whiteout. These are old skills, human skills learned on a world that tried to kill us for 1,000,000 years. Old skills against impossible odds," Commander Brix observed. "You would die heroically and accomplish nothing." "Then I go with him," General Vornar said, rising from his position near the back of the hall. The statement sent shockwaves through the assembled crew. Vornar, greatest warrior of the Galaxies, volunteering to accompany the weakest being aboard the ship on what everyone agreed was a futile mission. "General," Captain Nalia said, "your tactical expertise is invaluable, but the conditions—" "Will kill us both, probably," Vornar interrupted. "But the human is correct. 6 beings will die if we do nothing. Honor demands that we attempt rescue regardless of probability of success." Drakthar, recently recovered from his poisoning and still bearing the humiliation of owing his life to the human he had tormented, stood slowly from his seat. "I will go as well." "No," Ethan said firmly. 2 is enough. More than 2 is just additional people to die when this goes wrong." The young warrior's scales flushed with embarrassment, but he sat down without argument. Ethan had not meant the refusal as an insult. He simply understood that complex missions succeeded through focused expertise, not overwhelming force. "The rescue window opens in 6 hours, Captain Nalia announced. "Human Ethan, General Vornar, prepare your equipment. May the stars guide you both." As the assembly dispersed, beings approached Ethan with equipment suggestions, tactical advice, and expressions of both admiration and concern. But it was Vornar's words spoken quietly as they prepared to leave that would echo in Ethan's mind throughout the ordeal ahead. "Human, why do you risk everything for beings you have never met?" "Because," Ethan replied, checking his survival gear one final time. "Someone has to be willing to try the impossible. Otherwise, impossible becomes permanent." The shuttle Perseverance cut through the electromagnetic chaos surrounding Frost 7 like a needle threading through a cosmic storm, its hull groaning under forces that would have torn apart lesser vessels. Lightning danced across the reinforced plating, while the ship's shields flickered and sparked under the constant bombardment of charged particles. The electromagnetic storm surrounding the planet was unlike anything in the galactic databases, a phenomenon that occurred when stellar winds interacted with the planet's unique crystalline core, creating fields of energy that rendered conventional navigation completely useless. Vornar wrestled with manual controls that had been designed for emergency use, only his massive hands surprisingly delicate on instruments that required precision navigation. Sweat beaded on his silver scales despite the shuttle's climate control systems. The ancient warrior had piloted vessels through 3 galactic conflicts, had navigated asteroid fields, under enemy fire had landed on worlds where the very atmosphere corroded ship hulls, but he had never attempted anything quite like this. Navigation systems are completely compromised. Vornar reported, his voice steady despite the shuttle's violent shaking. I cannot determine our position relative to the research station. All satellite links are down, GPS networks are scrambled, and even basic directional sensors are giving conflicting readings. Beside him, Ethan monitored their descent trajectory with equipment that would have been considered primitive by the standards of most galactic civilizations, but which represented thousands of years of human innovation in the art of exploration. A magnetic compass, a simple needle suspended in fluid that pointed toward magnetic north, regardless of electronic interference. Paper charts hand-drawn based on orbital reconnaissance data marked with topographical features and distance measurements. Altitude readings taken through visual observation and atmospheric pressure calculations, techniques developed by Earth explorers who had mapped unknown continents using nothing but determination and ingenuity. Bearing 0.47 degrees magnetic. Ethan replied, consulting his compass with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years learning to navigate Earth's most dangerous wilderness regions. He made careful notations on his increasingly detailed map, tracking their descent path and calculating wind drift factors. Distance approximately 14 kilometers from projected landing site to target location. The research station should be positioned in a valley between two major ridgelines, sheltered from the worst of the planetary winds. The shuttle touched down in a whiteout so complete that they could barely see the landing struts from the cockpit windows. Outside, the wind howled with the voice of a dying world carrying snow and ice crystals at velocities that turned precipitation into projectiles. The sound was unlike anything either of them had experienced, a constant roar that seemed to come from the planet itself. Exterior temperature minus 186 degrees Celsius. Vornar read from the instruments, his voice carrying notes of disbelief. Wind speed, 94 kilometers per hour, with gusts exceeding 120. Visibility effectively 0 beyond 3 meters. Atmospheric pressure, 0.7 standard with trace gases that would be toxic to most known species. The readings represented conditions that would kill most galactic species within minutes of exposure. Even with protective suits and emergency heating systems, survival on Frost 7's surface required constant vigilance and perfect equipment function. Ethan pulled on his thermal gear layer upon layer of insulation designed to keep human biology functional in environments that would freeze most known life forms solid within moments. Each piece of equipment had been tested in Earth's harshest environments, from the Antarctic research stations to the highest mountain peaks, where human endurance met its absolute limits. "Stay close," he said, clipping a safety line between himself and the massive warrior. "In this whiteout, we could lose each other within 3 meters." They stepped out into hell made of ice and wind. The cold hit them like a physical force, even through their protection. Ethan's breath froze instantly, forming ice crystals that clicked against his face mask. Each step required enormous effort as they sank knee-deep into snow that had the consistency of powdered granite. "How do you navigate in this?" Vornar shouted over the wind. Ethan consulted his compass, checked the wind direction, and pointed toward what appeared to be solid white nothing. "Dead reckoning. Count steps track bearing estimate distance. If I'm wrong, we die. If I'm right, we find them." They walked for 3 hours through landscape that looked like the corpse of some frozen god. Ethan led the way, stopping every few minutes to check his compass and make notations on his increasingly ice-covered map. Vornar followed his warrior's training, keeping him alert for dangers that might emerge from the white chaos around them. The research station appeared suddenly materializing from the blizzard, like a dark metal ghost. Its hull was covered in ice so thick that the structure looked more like a natural formation than something built by intelligent beings. Emergency lights blinked weakly through the storm, the only sign that life might still exist within. "Main airlock is frozen solid," Vornar observed, pulling at a door that refused to budge. Ethan examined the station's exterior tracing power conduits with his hands until he found what he was looking for. Emergency access port. Should be manually operated. He pulled out tools that looked ancient compared to the technology surrounding them, a simple mechanical cutter and manual leverage bars. 20 minutes later, they breached the station's hull. Inside, they found 6 beings in various stages of hypothermic shutdown. Two Zalen scientists had gone dormant, their crystalline bodies dim and cold. A Hydralis researcher had wrapped herself in emergency thermal blankets, her tentacles barely moving. Three humanoid scientists from species Ethan didn't recognize huddled around a failing heating unit. "Power core is completely dead," one of them whispered. "Life support failed 6 hours ago. We have maybe another hour before we get you out of here," Ethan interrupted, already moving toward the station's engineering section. "Vornar helped them prepare for transport. I'm going to see if I can get enough power to run life support during evacuation." The station's power core had suffered a cascade failure during the electromagnetic storm. Ethan traced the damage through systems that were far more advanced than anything humans had built, but which operated on principles he understood. Energy had to flow. Circuits had to complete heat, had to be generated. "I can jury-rig a partial restart," he called out after examining the damage. "Not enough for full operation, but sufficient to run minimal life support for maybe 2 hours. "Will that be enough time to reach the shuttle?" Vornar asked. Ethan looked at the 6 weakened beings they needed to evacuate, calculated distance, and travel time through the storm, estimated how long it would take to navigate by compass in zero visibility, while supporting beings who could barely walk. "No," he said honestly, "but it's what we have." He worked with tools that future tech had made obsolete: wire cutters, manual welding equipment, mechanical connections that relied on physical contact rather than energy field interfaces. The power core flickered to life, providing just enough energy to warm the air and power emergency lighting. "We move now," Ethan announced. "Everyone stays connected by safety line. No one lets go, no matter what happens. If the line breaks, we all die." The journey back to the shuttle became an epic of endurance. They moved through the blizzard like a single organism connected by rope and shared determination. Ethan led the way, checking his compass every few steps, while Vornar brought up the rear, ensuring that no one fell behind. Halfway back, the safety line snapped. In the chaos of wind and snow, 3 of the rescued scientists became separated from the main group. Ethan found himself facing an impossible choice: continue to the shuttle with the beings he could save, or risk everyone's life searching for those lost in the whiteout. "Keep moving toward the shuttle," he told Vornar. "I'm going back for them." "That is suicide," the ancient warrior replied. "You will never find them in this storm. You will die, and we will have saved no one." "Maybe," Ethan agreed, "but I'm not leaving people behind." He disappeared into the white chaos, following intuition and desperation, rather than any scientific principle. For 40 minutes he searched through snow that stung like acid and wind that threatened to tear him apart. He found them by accident, 3 beings huddled in a shallow depression, barely conscious minutes from death. "Follow my voice," he called out, establishing a new safety line and leading them back toward where he hoped the shuttle waited. His compass spun wildly in the electromagnetic storm. His map was illegible under layers of ice, and his own strength was failing rapidly. But somehow they reached the shuttle. Vornar had kept the engines warm, and the passenger compartment heated. As they lifted off from Frost 7, rising through the storm toward the safety of space, the ancient warrior looked at Ethan with an expression that might have been awe. "You did something impossible today," Vornar said. "No," Ethan replied, helping to treat the rescued scientists for hypothermia. "I did something necessary. There's a difference." The shuttle docked with Oblivion's Edge 18 hours after departing. Word of the successful rescue had spread throughout the ship, and crew members lined the docking bay to witness the return of beings everyone had assumed were dead. Captain Nalia greeted them personally, her tentacles moving in patterns that expressed gratitude beyond words. "Human Ethan," she said formally, "you have brought honor to this ship and hope to the galaxy." But it was what happened next that would change everything and echo through galactic history for generations to come. General Vornar, greatest warrior of the Greylex, hero of 3 galactic conflicts, commander of armies and destroyer of fleets, veteran of battles that had shaped the political landscape of known space, knelt before the small human who had just led them through impossible odds. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. In Greylex culture, no warrior knelt except before death itself, or in recognition of someone whose honor exceeded their own. The docking bay fell silent as hundreds of beings witnessed something unprecedented. Crew members from 9 different species watched as the most respected warrior in the galaxy performed a ritual that hadn't been seen in over 2 centuries. Even the ship's atmospheric recyclers seemed to quiet their humming, as if the vessel itself recognized the significance of the moment. "By the ancient codes of my people," Vorner announced, his voice carrying throughout the docking bay with the resonance of ceremonial drums, "codes written in the blood of heroes and sealed with the oath of eternal vigilance, I name Ethan Cole Kethmore Battle Brother. He has proven himself worthy to stand among the greatest warriors in galactic history, through deeds that transcend species courage, that defies logic, and honor that shines brighter than any star." The ceremony was brief but profound, carrying the weight of traditions that stretched back through millennia of Greylick civilization. Vornar removed his own battle insignia, a symbol of honor earned through centuries of combat forged from metal, taken from the first Greylack's homeworld, and blessed by warriors whose names had become legend. The insignia had been worn by only 7 beings in galactic history, each one having demonstrated the kind of selfless courage that defined true heroism. As Vornar placed it on Ethan's uniform, the small metal piece seemed to pulse with significance that transcended its physical form. In Greylick's culture, this was recognition that transcended species politics or physical capability. It declared that Ethan possessed the rarest quality in the universe, the courage to act when action seemed hopeless, the strength to protect others when protection meant personal sacrifice. Drakthar was the first to approach after the ceremony. The young warrior who had once mocked Ethan as a pet human now stood before him with scales flushed in the patterns that indicated deep respect. "Human Ethan," Drakthar said formally, "I was wrong about your people, about strength, about what it means to be a warrior. I ask for the honor of serving under your command in future missions." Others followed. Scientists who had dismissed human intellect now sought his consultation on planetary surveys. Engineers who had considered Earth technology primitive now asked for training in old-way, problem-solving techniques. Warriors who had seen him as weakness now recognized him as someone they would follow into any battle. But the most profound change was in how Ethan saw himself. Standing in his laboratory later that night, surrounded by specimens from dozens of worlds, he no longer felt like an outsider pretending to belong. The battle insignia on his uniform wasn't just decoration. It was recognition that he had found his place among the stars. The small metal piece seemed to pulse with its own inner light, carrying the weight of Greylick's honor that stretched back through centuries of noble combat. The transformation felt surreal. Months ago, he had boarded Oblivion's edge as Earth's awkward representative, a biological curiosity tolerated for diplomatic reasons. Tonight, he wore the battle insignia of the most respected warrior in galactic history, acknowledged as an equal by beings whose civilizations had mastered the stars when humanity was still learning to control fire. But more than recognition, Ethan felt a profound sense of belonging that had eluded him throughout his life. On Earth, he had always been the scientist who preferred fieldwork to laboratory politics, the researcher more comfortable studying alien life than human social dynamics. Aboard Oblivion's edge, he had found something he never expected: a family forged not by blood or species, but by shared trials and mutual respect. A chime at his door announced a visitor. General Vornar entered, moving with the quiet grace that somehow seemed natural for beings of his size. The ancient warrior's presence filled the laboratory, but not oppressively, more like a mountain that provided shelter, rather than a storm that brought destruction. "I wanted to thank you," the ancient warrior said, his voice carrying harmonics of genuine gratitude. For reminding me what it means to be a protector, rather than just a destroyer. For showing me that true strength has nothing to do with size or fighting ability." Vornar paused, choosing his words carefully. "My people have forgotten much over the centuries. We remember how to conquer, but not why conquest matters. We remember how to fight, but not what we fight to protect. We remember how to destroy our enemies, but we have forgotten how to save our friends." The confession carried the weight of genuine sorrow. Here was a being who had commanded respect across the galaxy, whose very name struck fear into the hearts of enemies and inspired loyalty in allies, admitting that his people had lost their way. The greatest warrior of his generation, acknowledging that true greatness had nothing to do with the ability to wage war. And now we remember, because of you. Vornar's golden eyes reflected the laboratory's soft lighting. You have given my people something we thought was lost forever, a reminder of what we were meant to be. Warriors in service of life, not death. Protectors of the weak, not oppressors of the defeated. Ethan looked out through the laboratory's viewing port at the stars beyond their light stretching across impossible distances to reach this moment, this place, this conversation that would echo through the corridors of galactic history. Tomorrow, Oblivion's edge would reach a new system encounter. New worlds face new challenges that would test every being aboard. But he no longer faced those challenges alone. He had become something that the galaxy had thought impossible, a human who belonged among the greatest beings in known space. Not because he had changed, but because others had finally learned to see strength in forms they had never recognized. The universe was vast and filled with wonders beyond imagination. But the greatest wonder of all was the discovery that heroism came in every size, every shape, every species, waiting only for the courage to reveal itself when it mattered most. The small human who had been mocked as weakness had become proof of humanity's greatest truth, that courage, compassion, and determination could overcome any odds. That true strength came not from muscle, but from the willingness to do what was right when everything else counseled surrender. In the end, Ethan Cole had not just saved lives or earned recognition. He had saved something far more precious, the idea that heroism still existed in a universe that had forgotten what heroes looked like. And in the depths of space surrounded by beings who now called him brother, he finally understood that some Scifi stories were not meant to be believed, they were meant to be lived. The measure of a hero isn't found in their size or strength, but in their willingness to stand up when others fall down. If this story of human courage among the stars moved you, honor that feeling. Like this video, subscribe for more epic tales of heroism, and tell us in the comments what would you risk everything to save. Because sometimes the universe is listening for voices brave enough to answer the call.